If you're ready to experience more peace and joy in your life, if you want to feel more comfortable in your own skin, and if you're ready to discover and expand on your energetic gifts and personal power, you're in the right place. So here's your host, Kelle Sparta.
Welcome back to Spirit Guides. I'm your host, Kelle Sparta, transformational shaman and spiritual coach. As always on Mondays, I am here with Joshua Radawan, also a spiritual coach, and he specializes in working with people in the paranormal industry. So today we're going to talk about shadow work. Do I need a flashlight for this? So I'm excited to talk about that. But before we do that, Josh sent me a message yesterday. So we record these well in advance, and because we're doing 5 episodes a week, we're batching different things and things come out at different times and whatever. And the readings and the healings and stuff are a little slower because they take longer. So, whereas we can do 2 or 3 of these episodes in a day, those are generally, 1 a day. And so this one will have come out by the time you hear this episode. This one will have been out for a couple of months, but we're talking about episode 105, which is opening to your gifts. And this, Josh has listened to this twice yesterday, he said, and I did tell him to buckle up for it. So if you haven't listened to this one yet, you guys, Josh is going to talk about what his experience was. This is the first time I'm hearing it. He just said, he sent me a text message that said, listen twice yesterday, very powerful. And that's all he said. So I want to get his feedback on what that was about for him and how he felt and so on.
So I kind of got to go back a little bit to I have to go back a little bit farther to go back a little bit. And that was when Kelle recorded. She's like, "Oh my God, I don't know what I've done. This is amazing." And I'm like, she's like, "You should get the copy from our editor." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I've just been through a lot of intense processes, and I wasn't really sure. So I waited like 4 days. I'm like, whatever. Like, what's the worst that could happen?" So I listened to it yesterday, and I have to say, first, it's different than any of them. I've listened to every single one she's done, and I'll tell you that being able to connect with it intentionally, right? The energy that that Kelle is putting out for me, the grief clearing one is so powerful. Also, I forget the name of it, but there's one where it's accelerate your path, which, holy shit. I did that before we stepped into all this work, just so you know, about a month before then. So, just so you know.
I told you it works.
Especially when, you can meet that person in a place of belief based on what they put out into the world. That's the big piece for me, is like when you can believe it. And you talked a lot about that in that. Like, if you can believe that this change is taking place, it is. And I'll tell you, this one was different in the sense that it was a lot higher pitch and less breaking stuff up, right? Like there was a lot more. It was just different. It was just. I could feel myself raising. I lay down in all meditation. Everybody tells me not to, whatever. I do it my way. So I could feel. At first, I started getting extremely warm, and that to me is like symbolic of how I connect to your energy sometimes. Because when I did your energy scan, I was like, "Why is it like 30 degrees hotter in here?" I was like, "This is ridiculous. I'm sweating." So
welcome to my world.
So, I knew that I was really connected to this one. So I was, as I was going, though, I could just feel my body buzzing. And, I was just being with the experience and putting everything else out of my mind, which is, a lot going on sometimes. So it's a little bit more difficult for me to get into that space at times. But, at the end, she walks us back down for like 4 minutes, and you could tell she's like, "I don't know what I've done. Like, this is amazing," right? And I was like, "Yes, thank you. Keep telling me to come back to my body, because this is very, very next level." And so it was an amazing experience, and I had some very, very interesting dreams last night. Not that that's completely outside of my norm, but it was a little bit more vivid than I have experienced in a long time, and it had different players in them, which is something new to me. So and the dreamscape is one of those opening to the gifts I've been working with. So that would make sense that would be, one of them that's coming through. So yeah, very, very powerful. And then she texted me. She's like, I thought you were scared of it and weren't going to open it. I was like, ha! When have you known me not to feel into fear? So, let's get it on.
Well, Well, and I approach that one very differently too, right? So typically when I do a sound healing, I start with where someone is. And I work on clearing blocks and breaking things up and releasing them from limiting beliefs and things like that, right? This one, when I did it, I was actually called to do it from a different perspective because this is opening to your gifts, right? And your gifts are up and out, right? So your gifts require you to connect into the universe around you. So I had you up and pulled you up and out to get you to your gifts because our gifts are often blocked by our fears and our limiting beliefs and our la 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 la. And this time I was like, well, what if I just pulled you up and out of your body and cleared your field and connected you in to your guides at a higher level and connected you into the universe at a higher level and did all of that and then bring it back down and settle it into the body. That 4 minutes at the end was me trying to get the new version of you back into the body that remembered the old energy. And so that's what that was. You can hear me start to close and bring people back, and I'm like, wait, this isn't settling, right? They're not in their bodies yet. I need to fix this, right? And so there's this 4 minutes of me being like, okay, you need to accept in, because when you make a shift at that level, there are big things that can happen in your life. And so I had to get people to accept the shifts that have happened and the consequences of those shifts and the things that may fall away and the new things that come in and all of the things. So this is healing at a higher level. And so so if you haven't listened to it yet, you should go back and listen to it because, it was a whole nother layer.
Make sure you listen to it all the way to the end.
Yeah, you have to listen. Any sound healing, you have to listen all the way to the end. Don't stop in the middle. Okay, so yeah. Okay, all right. Well, and I say this. Why did we talk about this on this episode? Because we're like 7 minutes into the episode and we still haven't talked about shadow work, right? But we are talking about shadow work. Okay, that's the thing. Is that when you are trying to do healing work, when you are working on limiting beliefs, when you are working on the stories that you tell yourself, when you are working on your attachment to your current reality, when you are working on any of these things, you are doing shadow work. When you are looking at parts of yourself that you don't want to look at, that you don't like, that's shadow work, right? So, that's the first thing I want to say is we're defining shadow work, right? And shadow work is anything that is limiting your experience of life and which you generally keep in the dark because you don't want to look at it or you're afraid of it. That's the whole point of shadow work, is it's the stuff stuffed in the dark corners of your beingness, right? And so when we do shadow work, so I want to say this first. People try to do shadow work before they're ready to do shadow work because they think that's what they're supposed to do. Okay? So let me explain this to you. Before you are ready to do shadow work, you have to first give yourself the bandwidth to change, which means you have to get rid of that monkey mind screeching in your ear going, danger, Will Robinson, danger, danger, and worry, dread, fear, blah, blah, blah. If that is the primary channel that you are listening to in your brain, you are not ready for shadow work. You need to clear the decks. You need to get your brain to shut the hell up so that you can be still, because shadow work has to be done in the stillness. And if your brain is too busy yelling at you, danger, Will Robinson, danger, you suck, whatever, then you don't have any bandwidth for stillness. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is you have to learn how to solidify your energetic container. Because when we have challenged upbringings in some way, trauma in our background, it stretches us, makes our containers bigger. So it serves a purpose, right? It makes our energetic containers bigger, but it also puts holes and tears in them, and we have to repair those, right? And so, the second step is to become solid unto yourself. And so this is about solidifying your identity, because oftentimes when you grow up in these sorts of environments, you're not allowed to have your own identity, right? You're supposed to be a reflection of what the people around you want. And so solidifying your identity gives you the container in which to do the shadow work. Okay, so again, if you are not solid in yourself, if you don't know your own mind, if you are not able to make a decision and hold it until you're ready to implement it, and instead all the energy drains out of it, right? If you don't and keep holding on to it, then your energetic container is not solid. If you aren't taking up your own space, if you're bad at setting boundaries, if you haven't owned your power, if you don't know your own value when you're not doing for someone else, if you don't know how to love yourself, all of those are pieces and parts of creating this solid container for yourself. So that's step 2. You need to do that second. And then and only then are you ready to do full shadow work. And, that also requires, the transition there requires that you also develop the ability to focus and to get still, right? And so this is the process of shadow work. And people are constantly being like, I got to do my shadow work. And they are still in that first stage. And if you try to do shadow work before you have those two things done, there's one of two things are going to happen. If you have a terrible sense of self-preservation, you will re-traumatize yourself. And a lot of us have terrible senses of self-preservation because we've been told to abandon ourselves for years, right? And if you have a good sense of self-preservation, then nothing will happen, okay? And then you'll get frustrated and you'll say, this doesn't work, okay? But it does work. You just weren't ready for it, okay? So step 1 is accomplished in the Welcome to the Woo program. So if you don't know how to get there and you don't know how to get through that, this is one of the pathways to do that. And step 2 is in the Woo Squared program. And so if you are looking for a pathway to those to get you there as fast as humanly possible without blowing you up, this is what we do. We are the express train, right? So we can get you through the first stage in 4 months and the second stage in a year, which is 15 years worth of personal growth and development work and about 7 years of energetic training, all in that year and 4 months. So, I recommend it because this is what's necessary, right? And then the Woo You program is all about doing the shadow work. But shadow work itself is difficult. There's a reason we hide these things. Right? We want them hidden because we don't want to look at them. And if you don't want to look at something, you are either in massive avoidance or you are in massive fear or you are in massive pain and you don't want to see it, right? Shadow work is also where we do soul retrieval work. So this is another thing is that people will do soul retrieval. Oh my God. Okay. So I went to an event in Richmond, Virginia, and a woman got up in front of the room, and it was clear to me that she was repeating a meditation that she had heard from somebody else. I am hoping she modified it, because if not, then this person's doing damage. But she did a meditation in which she told everybody in the room to go out and collect all the pieces of themselves that had been left behind in any of their experiences and to bring them home. Now, if you leave a piece of yourself behind in an experience, it's because that experience was traumatic. When you bring that piece back, you have to process that trauma. There is no situation in which it is appropriate to bring back all of your pieces all at once. That will bring up so much trauma that it will derail your life. It is a really bad idea. So when she was doing this meditation, I threw a little shield up and said, you can have one and not a big one, because there was no aftercare on this. Okay. I'm like, nope, you can have one, not a big one.
And we were just talking about this the other day. I told you that I had kind of pinpointed where a couple of mine were. And it's interesting because now that I put that together, I had done that, soul retrieval piece the night before and worked on a couple pieces. And I've done these throughout my journey because there were some pieces I needed to pull back to do some of the work. And when Spirit calls you to it, you gotta look at it when it's called for. At least for me, that's been my path with it. There were some pieces I actually needed midway through Woo Squared for me that were limiting my ability to do the work that I was doing. But I will say, like I have been a little bit more exhausted the last couple days, and I did that sound healing, and I woke up this morning. I was like, I'm gonna fireball energy, but there's definitely still some processing going on around it. And I've been through it before. Some of them integrate a little bit faster than others. This one is kind of an ongoing. I see it a week and a half, 2 weeks. I see that process. Why are you smiling? Don't smile at me right now. Don't you fucking smile at me. 1.5
be
weeks
longer
is
than a
what I
week
have
to 2
given it.
weeks. It might be longer. Yes, I understand. But this is the thing, right? And so I want to reference that we just talked about ethics, and what I did in that scenario was I impacted what happened to everybody else. And in that scenario, I was I doing black magic because I was impacting other people's intentions, right? Yeah, I was. And I was doing it because the vast majority of the people in the room were effectively children in the understanding of what they were doing. And so from that perspective, I trusted that the universe put me there to keep them safe, right? Because I was like, oh, hell no. Because the person in the front of the room didn't even really, she was reading from her notes to explain what the chakra system was. So, this was, it was a very nascent community, brand new to everything. And so they were dabbling in stuff they didn't understand. And I was the only elder in the room. And so I was like, okay, we're going to put a little safety bar on this one. Right. So I didn't say they couldn't do it. I just said you can have one, and they had the meditation. If they wanted to go and get more later, they could do that. But I was doing a safety thing for them. And, it still was imposing my will on them. And I took the karma for that. It was okay because, sometimes you're in a situation where that's an appropriate thing, right? So, I want to make sure that everybody, I want people to understand that that I do practice what I preach and that I am aware of what I do, right? It is important to practice what you preach. You have to be aligned with your own message and your own beingness. So, and sometimes it is what it is, right? So here's the thing about shadow work. Okay. Shadow work can be very difficult. And this is why we don't do it until we're ready to do it. Because if you're not ready, as I said, you'll either re-traumatize or nothing will happen. And the reason that you re-traumatize is that you push past your boundaries and you end up hurting yourself again because you don't know where your edges are. You don't know where your boundaries are. You don't know where the pain happens. And, can you gain knowledge from that? Yes, you absolutely can gain knowledge from that. Can you heal from that? Yes, you absolutely can heal doing that in that way, but it will take you a longer time and it'll hurt a lot more. Okay. The reason it doesn't work is when you have good self-preservation is because you come up against the fear and you don't go there. And then it doesn't work. And I think that one's almost worse because it reinforces for you that it's not the right path. It says, nope, this doesn't work. And so it inoculates you against ever doing the work in the future in that way, right? And so, this is why it's so important to be ready for it, because most of us do I'm going to just shred myself and hope I can put myself back together again path, right? Yeah, you, me, both, yeah. But I got to tell you, there is a kinder, gentler path, okay? and learning how to do it in a way that is more effective and less painful is, there's a lot to be said for that. So I highly recommend doing the first 2 steps first because that's what makes it easier. And then understanding how to process, because this is the other thing, is that when you start this work, there is, people will say, oh, well, just go into the fear. And yeah, I got to tell you, That shit does not work if you don't have any skills for dealing with that fear, right? Because that fear can overwhelm you and you can find yourself in a complete panic and a fall on the floor because you went into your fear with no skills to get out. Kathy was at an event once and a Mayan shaman had done a meditation from the stage and brought people into a place and told them to go face their biggest fear. And yeah, in a room of 300 people. I'm like, really? But, you know, she's from a culture where everybody knows how to do meditation. Everybody knows how to moderate for themselves. Everybody knows how. They're raised doing this from a very young age. It did not occur to her that, you know, Americans might not have a sense of how to do this work on their own. And, you know, there was this woman who went in, faced her biggest fear. Most people opted for a lesser fear. Most people were smart enough to opt for a lesser fear. This woman did not have the self-preservation, right? She's like us. She'd be like, okay, here we go. Whoosh. And she got stuck and her fear was eating her. And the shaman didn't know how to fix it because she'd never had an experience of somebody not being able to get out of their meditation. And so Kathy and another practitioner had to go in and get this woman from her and extricate her from her own fear that was eating her. And so, you know, this is what happens. And this is one of the reasons why it's important to have your skills down, because when you go to other people's events, you don't know what their level. I mean, this was a really skilled shaman. She knew her stuff, but she was coming from a completely different culture. And that culture didn't have a need for the skill that was needed from that stage, right? And so, you know, this is why it's important to be able to manage and regulate yourself, because if you don't and you go into these spaces, you could be that woman and you could be entirely dependent upon the universe having accidentally provided these random people who could help you, right? I have a friend of mine who she used to go to these sorts of events and she'd end up in a psych ward every time on antipsychotic medication because she couldn't get back and nobody could get her back. And it's like, you know, at some point I'm like, maybe you should not go, right? but you know, I mean, that's how it is, right? So you have to know that you doing your own inner work, being your own foundation. This is the thing, is that when we get into this work, the very first thing we want to do is turn over responsibility for our journey to somebody else, because we don't know what the hell we're doing, right? And it's appropriate to be like looking for a guide to help you. That's appropriate, right? Because you don't know what the hell you're doing and you're brand new to this and you don't even know what questions to ask, right? So when you come into a new space, whether it's this space or any other space that's brand new for you, you're going to look for a mentor or a guide or, you know, education or something that will help you to figure out how to navigate your new reality, right? And that's appropriate. The challenge, though, is that we don't... Because of the way that the Western world is oriented in a hierarchical structure, there is a tendency for teachers in this field to want to set up a guru model, right? And the guru model is, I'm up here and you're down here. And you do what I tell you blindly in the faith that I'm giving it to you in a way that's appropriate for you. And that's great as long as the person is, one, out for your best interests, and two, ethical, and three, not on their own ego trip, right? And, you know, do you know this about them? It's hard to tell, right? It's hard to say until you really get to know the person. And usually by then you're deep in and now you're being questioned about whether it's them or it's you, right? And so this is why it's so important to learn how to manage your own process before you go into deep work with a spiritual teacher of any kind, right? It's like, if you learn how to manage your own process, then when you come to those spaces where you're questioning, you know, you are solid enough in yourself to know what your truth is and to compare it to their truth, and then to decide, is it my resistance that's keeping me from my next level of evolution, or is this person's ego trying to manipulate me? Because that is a very real question that happens at certain points in the student-teacher dynamic. And sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other, right? Depending on the teacher and the circumstance. So, you know, when you're going into this, you really want to get a solid foundation in place so that you know how to manage yourself within these environments, because it is very easy to get into a space and to be put into an environment where the environment is not safe. I don't know if I told this story on this podcast, but there was a guy who was talking to me at a networking event when I told him I was a shaman. He said, "Oh, I went to a weekend shaman workshop, and and I'm not very good at it." And I said, "Well, really? Tell me about that." And he said, I went to this thing, and I asked him to describe for me how the situation was set up and all of this. And what it came down to was the container was unsafe. And therefore, he did not allow himself to do much within it because the container was unsafe. And because as he felt into the situation, I could feel into his experience of it, and I could feel the energies and read what was going on. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, this isn't you." I said, "You're probably actually very good at this." I said, "It's just you were in an unsafe environment, and you instinctively understood that and scaled back." And so, when we step into these spaces, you never know what you're getting. And this is one of the reasons why when I train my people when I train ritualists for my programs, I make sure that part of the curriculum is they have to go to other people's events. And that's because I want them to experience what other people experience out in the world from these different types of events so that they can see what works, what doesn't work. Sometimes you learn a new skill because somebody's very skilled. Sometimes you learn what not to do because somebody screwed something up horribly, but it's educational no matter what, right? And so, but I do want to say that, everybody's doing the best they can. And oftentimes because they have insufficient education, because there isn't really a lot of solid education. That's why I put all my stuff together the way I did, is because, I've been studying for 50 years and I've just gotten all of this stuff together. There wasn't a lot of structure available. There was, for basic ritual, sure, you can find that in Wicca books and things like that, in Hermetic magic and things like that. But for personal evolution, you get bits and pieces here and there. And nobody talks about these stages that come before the shadow work. And that's just something that I have discovered after 50 years of study, is that these are the stages that have to happen beforehand. And I don't hear anybody talking about them. So, when you're going to be doing your shadow work, you want to make sure that you do these effectively, because if you're not solid when you start to do your work, then it breaks you up. And, that's the key. So as far as doing the shadow work itself, that's actually surprisingly simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And it is, look at the stuff that scares you. Look at the stuff you're resisting. Look at the stuff you don't want to pay attention to. Look at the stuff that is screaming at you or hiding from you, right? And, it becomes more and more subtle the more work you do, because you have to, originally you start with belief structures and then you have to go to assumptions. And assumptions are very difficult to identify because we are not conscious of the assumptions that we make. And so those are often done in reflection. So, shadow work itself is a simple concept. Getting through it takes some doing. There's a reason why we spend 3 months in the Woo You program on exactly how to do your inner work and how to make that go. Because, sometimes you could take one angle in and it doesn't work. You take another angle in and it doesn't work. You do another one. It's just like sticking there, and you just keep going. And this is why I give you like 8 or 10 different ways to do your shadow work in each way, because sometimes you need a different path, right? And so, these are, it's very much about self-inquiry, right? That's shadow work and self-inquiry are very similar. It's just that shadow work tends to be a little more hardcore.
Eviscerating.
But I want to say this because, if you're really a beginner here, the thing I want to say is that the first 2 stages are not terrifying. Okay, that they are perspective shifting, they are identity shifting, they are occasionally challenging to your worldview, but they are not like painful and hard and racking and sobbing and stuff. And by the time you get through those 2 stages, you are ready for the deeper level work. Okay. It's not nearly as overwhelming as you feel it will be right now when you're just getting started, because the just getting started phase, you feel like you don't have enough bandwidth for your life, much less bandwidth to try and heal. And that's the reason why the very first step is clearing up the bandwidth, right? To getting the bandwidth for change. And the reason for that is because the bandwidth that you've got is used up by a lot of negative energy. It's exhausting energy. Okay. Anytime you're being self-abusive, or you're worrying, or you're dreading, or you're fearing, or whatever, all of that is exhausting. And so I am not surprised that you feel like you don't have the energy to change. That's why the first step is getting rid of all that exhausting energy. Okay. So don't panic when you're thinking about this. It is good fear to not try and do it before you're ready. Okay, I will say that. That is good fear. That is protective fear. But, don't avoid the work just because you feel like you haven't, that you don't have the bandwidth for it. Because if you start the work with clearing the bandwidth, clearing the bandwidth for change, then you will have the bandwidth for it, and it'll be okay. Okay, so that's what I have to say on that subject. So with that, I think we'll call this episode good. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and enter in your ratings to win a free reading on air on the Friday Ascend program. You do that by taking a screenshot before you hit enter. It has to be one with text, and you submit it to support@kellesparta.com. It has to come to that email specifically, or it does not get entered into the drawing. Okay, and with that, don't forget, what you focus on expands, what you intend is what you create, so choose wisely. Bye.
So that's it for today's episode of Spirit Guides Podcast. Head on over to iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show. Every week, one lucky listener who subscribes and posts a review on iTunes will be entered into a drawing for a $10,000 value grand prize and a private reading with Kelle Sparta herself. Be sure to head on over to spiritguidespodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Kelle's gift and join us on the next episode.